a man whose life and death have echoed through the corridors of time, leaving an indelible mark on the annals of history and philosophy. Few figures loom as large in the history of thought. Socrates stands among the giants, his influence permeating through the ages, shaping the very foundation of Western philosophy. Born in Athens in 470 BC, Socrates lived during a time of great intellectual and political upheaval. Athens was a city-state brimming with energy, ideas, and conflicts. Socrates dedicated his life to the pursuit of truth and virtue. He believed that the unexamined life was not worth living, and he sought to understand the deeper meanings of existence. He became a constant presence in the bustling Athenian marketplace known as the Agora. Here, amidst the traders and citizens, he would engage in dialogues, questioning and probing the beliefs of those he encountered. Engaging anyone and everyone in philosophical discussions, Socrates was relentless in his quest for knowledge. He used a method of inquiry now known as the Socratic Method, a form of cooperative argumentative dialogue that stimulates critical thinking and illuminates ideas. Socrates, unlike many philosophers, never wrote anything down. His teachings and ideas were preserved through the works of his students, most notably Plato, who documented Socratic dialogues in his writings. So we know of him mostly through the writings of his student Plato. These dialogues provide a window into Socratic thought, revealing his methods and philosophies. Socrates' relentless questioning, however, made him powerful enemies. His habit of exposing ignorance and challenging established norms did not sit well with many influential Athenians. He challenged the status quo, questioned authority, and exposed hypocrisy wherever he found it. His mission was to awaken the moral consciousness of Athens, but this mission came at a great personal cost, and exposed hypocrisy wherever he found it. This fearless approach earned him both admiration and animosity, as he was seen as a disruptive force in Athenian society. This earned him the nickname Gadfly, a stinging insect that irritates livestock. The metaphor was apt, as Socrates' probing questions and critiques were seen as an irritant to the complacency of the Athenian elite. A stinging insect that irritates livestock. Just as a gadfly provokes a response from the animal it bites, Socrates provoked thought and reflection in those he engaged with. In 399 BC, the tension between Socrates and the Athenian authorities reached a climax. He was put on trial for impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens, charges that reflected the deep unease his ideas had stirred. Socrates was put on trial for impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens. The trial was a dramatic and pivotal moment, showcasing the clash between old traditions and new ways of thinking. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. The sentence was a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those who challenge societal norms and question established beliefs. Rather than renounce his beliefs, Socrates chose to stand by his principles. He believed that compromising his integrity would be a fate worse than death. Socrates chose to drink hemlock, a poisonous concoction, and die for his principles. His death was a powerful statement of his commitment to truth and virtue, and die for his principles. His final moments, as described by Plato, were marked by calmness and dignity, leaving a lasting impression on his followers and future generations. The death of Socrates is a pivotal moment in Western intellectual history. It symbolizes the eternal struggle between the individual and the state, between free thought and societal conformity. It raises profound questions about the nature of truth, justice, and the role of the individual in society. Socrates' life and death continue to inspire debates and reflections on these timeless issues, and the role of the individual in society. His legacy is a testament to the power of critical thinking and the enduring importance of questioning the world around us. This essay delves into the life, trial, and enduring legacy of Socrates, exploring why he remains such a captivating and controversial figure centuries later. His story is not just a historical account but a call to engage with the world thoughtfully and courageously. Exploring why he remains such a captivating and controversial figure centuries later. Socrates' influence is seen in modern philosophy, education, and the ongoing quest for knowledge and ethical living. His life challenges us to live with integrity, seek truth, and never cease to question. Socrates wasn't born into wealth or privilege. His father was a stonemason, his mother was a midwife. Socrates in his youth likely worked as a craftsman himself. Despite his humble origins, Socrates possessed a keen intellect and a thirst for knowledge. We know little of Socrates' early life. He received a basic Greek education. He likely served in the Athenian army. He married and had children. It was not until middle age that Socrates truly embarked on his philosophical journey. Socrates, it is said, was deeply influenced by the Delphic oracle. The oracle, when asked who was the wisest man in Athens, replied, Socrates. Socrates, initially puzzled by this pronouncement, set out to test the oracle's words. He engaged in countless dialogues, questioning politicians, poets, and artisans about their supposed wisdom. Socrates' approach to philosophy was revolutionary. He rejected the traditional lectures and pronouncements of other philosophers. Instead, he engaged in dialogue, a dynamic exchange of ideas designed to stimulate critical thinking and expose contradictions. This method, known as the Socratic Method, is still widely used in education today. It involves asking a series of probing questions to challenge assumptions, expose flaws in reasoning, and ultimately arrive at a deeper understanding of a subject. Socrates believed that true knowledge resided within each individual. His role, he argued, was not to impart information but to act as a midwife, helping others give birth to their own understanding. He saw himself as an intellectual gadfly, stinging people into questioning their beliefs and challenging conventional wisdom. Socrates' relentless questioning made him both a beloved teacher and a controversial figure. Socrates lived during a turbulent period in Athenian history. The Peloponnesian War, a decades-long conflict between Athens and Sparta, cast a long shadow over his life. This war was not just a series of battles but a profound struggle that affected every aspect of Athenian society. Families were torn apart, resources were depleted, and the very fabric of the city-state was tested. Socrates, a philosopher who valued dialogue and inquiry, found himself in a world increasingly dominated by violence and political strife. Athens, once a beacon of democracy and culture, was weakened by war, plague, and political instability. The city that had given birth to philosophy, drama, and democracy was now a shadow of its former self. The plague that struck Athens during the war killed thousands, including the great leader Pericles, leaving the city in a state of despair and confusion. Political factions vied for power, and the once unified city became a battleground for competing interests. The Peloponnesian War ended in 404 BC with Athens' defeat. The once mighty Athenian navy was decimated, and the city's walls were torn down. The defeat was not just a military loss but a profound psychological blow to the Athenians, who had prided themselves on their cultural and intellectual superiority. The aftermath of the war left the city in ruins, both physically and morally. The Spartans imposed a brutal oligarchy on Athens, known as the 30 Tyrants. This regime was characterized by its harshness and lack of democratic principles. The 30 Tyrants ruled with an iron fist, dismantling the democratic institutions that had defined Athens for so long. They were supported by a small group of wealthy Athenians who benefited from the new order, while the majority of the population suffered under their oppressive rule. The 30 Tyrants ruled through terror and oppression, executing their opponents and confiscating property. They targeted anyone who opposed their rule, including many of Socrates' friends and associates. The atmosphere in Athens became one of fear and suspicion, as neighbors turned against each other and trust became a rare commodity. The tyrant's reign of terror left deep scars on the Athenian psyche, scars that would take years to heal. Socrates, though critical of Athenian democracy, refused to participate in the excesses of the 30 tyrants. He believed in the power of reason and dialogue, and he continued to engage in philosophical discussions with anyone who would listen. Socrates' commitment to his principles made him a target for the tyrants, but he remained steadfast in his refusal to compromise his beliefs. His courage in the face of oppression became a beacon of hope for many Athenians. He continued to teach and speak his mind even when it put him at risk. Socrates' public lectures and private conversations were filled with probing questions and challenging ideas. He encouraged his students to think critically and to question the status quo, a dangerous stance in a city ruled by fear. Despite the risks, Socrates' dedication to the pursuit of truth never wavered, and his influence continued to grow. The 30 tyrants were eventually overthrown, and democracy was restored to Athens. The return of democratic governance was a moment of great celebration for the Athenians, who had endured so much suffering under the tyrants. The restoration of democracy brought a renewed sense of hope and possibility as the city began to rebuild and recover from the years of turmoil. However, the scars of the past were not easily forgotten. The city remained deeply divided, and Socrates' outspokenness had made him many enemies. The wounds inflicted by the war and the tyrant's rule had left the city fractured, with lingering tensions and unresolved conflicts. Socrates, with his relentless questioning and refusal to conform, became a lightning rod for the frustrations and fears of many Athenians. His trial and subsequent execution would become one of the most infamous episodes in the history of Athens, a tragic end for a man who had dedicated his life to the pursuit of wisdom and truth. In 399 BC, Socrates was formally charged with impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens. This trial was not just a legal proceeding but a significant cultural and philosophical event that would echo through the ages. Socrates, a man who had dedicated his life to questioning the status quo and seeking deeper truths, now found himself at the mercy of the very society he sought to enlighten. The charges were brought by Miletus, a poet, Anytus, a wealthy tanner, and Lycon, an orator. These men were not just random accusers. They were prominent figures in Athenian society, each representing different interests and factions. Their combined influence and the weight of their accusations made the trial a matter of public spectacle and intense scrutiny. These men represented different factions within Athenian society, but they all shared a resentment of Socrates' influence and his constant questioning of their authority. Socrates' method of relentless questioning, known as the Socratic Method, often left his interlocutors feeling exposed and embarrassed, which earned him many enemies among the powerful and influential. The charge of impiety was a serious one in ancient Athens. Religion was deeply intertwined with the state, and to question or reject the gods was seen as a threat to the social order and the very fabric of Athenian life. The Athenians believed that their prosperity and success were directly linked to their piety and the favor of the gods. It essentially meant not believing in the gods recognized by the state. Socrates was accused of introducing new deities and thus undermining the traditional religious practices that were considered essential for the well-being of the city. Socrates, however, never claimed to be an atheist. He often spoke of a divine inner voice or daimonion that guided his actions and decisions. This concept was foreign and unsettling to many Athenians, who viewed it as a rejection of their traditional beliefs. He believed in a divine force that guided the universe. This belief in a higher moral order and a guiding divine presence was central to his philosophy and his way of life. However, his views were often misunderstood and misrepresented by those who felt threatened by his teachings. His accusers, however, twisted his words and used his unorthodox religious views to paint him as a dangerous radical. They argued that his teachings were leading the youth astray, encouraging them to question and defy the established norms and authorities. The charge of corrupting the youth stemmed from Socrates' association with several young men who had become associated with the 30 tyrants. These young men, influenced by Socrates' teachings, were seen as a threat to the democratic order of Athens. The 30 tyrants were a short-lived oligarchic regime that had caused much suffering and turmoil in the city, and any connection to them was viewed with suspicion and hostility. Despite the gravity of the charges and the hostility of his accusers, Socrates remained steadfast in his principles. He used the trial as an opportunity to further his philosophical inquiries, questioning the very nature of justice, piety, and the role of the individual in society. His defense was not just a plea for his own life, but a profound statement on the importance of living a virtuous and examined life. Ultimately, Socrates was found guilty and sentenced to death by drinking hemlock. His trial and execution marked a pivotal moment in the history of Western philosophy, symbolizing the conflict between the individual and the state, and the enduring struggle for intellectual freedom and integrity.